Hello,
Hoş geldiniz.
I'm Dr. Işılay Gürsu,
I'm Dr. Peter Cherry.
and welcome to the Heritage Türkiye podcast by the British Institute at Ankara, BIAA. Today, we are very happy to have Dr. Leonidas Karakatsanis with us, who is an assistant professor at the University of Macedonia. And before that, he was the assistant director at the BIAA between 2015 and 2019. And before that, he was a postdoctoral researcher at the BIAA, just like us.
In fact, I was going to say it's especially good because I am currently the assistant director, but when I was a postdoc, Leo was the assistant director. So everything I learned and all the mistakes I make are thanks to seeing Leo on the post. But Leo got his PhD from the University of Essex in ideology and discourse analysis, and we'll be learning a little bit more about what that means soon. And he is also the author of Turkish-Greek Relations, Rapprochement, Civil Society and the Politics of Friendship, 2014. It was published by the Routledge series in Mediterranean Studies. So, Leo, how did you first become interested and involved in Turkey?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting, and it's a big pleasure of being back here, being back in Ankara, visiting the institute, and seeing you both. It kind of relates with my past life, which was a past life of a musician, and in 2000, December 2000, our then group that we were experimenting a bit with the combination of jazz and ethnic music was selected to represent Greece in one of the festivals that was organized in Ankara. That was back then, 1999, the process of European integration. There was civil society institutions were supported significantly by the European Union. So there were few very interesting festivals organized for music here, and it was kind of international music festivals. So suddenly a group from Greece is here, and I'm here. And it's my ever first visit to Turkey in Ankara, which is quite nice to remember always that it's Ankara. It's a kind of small home for me in this country. Ankara, it's the first place I visited, and suddenly there was an explosion of thoughts and feelings being here, because of course, as many people would know, this kind of Greek-Turkish thing is something that it's deeply written inside you when you get out of school. You have just learned a very classic, very nationalist version of history. So being here, it was like, oh wow, we are in Turkey. And then it was kind of a big discovery, realizing that the Turkey is something very different from what we had learned. But I think one of the most interesting thing for me was that being in a group of a very progressive music cohort, that all of us we were feeling we were doing something really progressive in music. Suddenly, I realized that most of my friends were not that progressive in the terms of they were approaching this new setting in Turkey. They were, and I was like, wow, that's quite interesting thing. So I just felt a bit different at that point. So I went back, and in parallel to music, my hobby back then was studying politics at the university on a degree that I couldn't finish. It was just like laying there, staying there for years. And there was a new course on Turkish and Ottoman history that had just opened, and I rushed to take the course. And then it started. Kind of, it was a non-ending interest that it was just getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper.
Usually it starts the other way, but in your case, it was the music that brought you here.
Music that brought me here, and the music and the visit to Turkey that actually finally brought me to academia. So this is a kind of, it's a big thing, that visit to Ankara in 2000.
Wonderful. I love this part of the story. You're looking at Turkish-Greek relationships, and you're looking at the role of civil society. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role civil society plays?
The thing is that, Greek-Turkish relations is something that has been researched and is still being researched and analyzed, and it's usually analyzed from what we call in social sciences a top-down perspective, looking at leadership, political leadership, what the leaders do, the international agreements, etc., etc. So at a point back then in 2000s, when I started trying to see what would be interesting to look at, because I was really interested in how the relations between the two countries go. I felt that there was a gap in analyzing what do people feel and what do people have actually done for the betterment of the relation of the two states. So I said, this is something that specifically back then, 2000 to 2005, I felt that I was part of this group of people that wanted better relationship, a more close. We really wanted for Greeks and Turks to get to know each other better. But I said, are we actually the first that were doing this? What was going on in the past? So I started kind of looking at a long history of what has been coined as Greek-Turkish friendship. So attempts to come up with friendly relations instead of relations of enmity and conflict between the two countries at the societal level. And the very first thing that surprised me was that this was a much longer history than we knew back then. We thought, just to, like a parenthesis we need here, 1999, there are two consecutive earthquakes that hit first Turkey, earthquake in Izmit, and then a month later in Athens. And this kind of produced a shock to both societies because they felt, we are fighting over what, kind of uninhabited islands, and suddenly so many thousands of people can die. Why don't we kind of look at each other and care a bit of each other? But we could summarize what happened in 1999 like this. So there was actually a genuine interest of Greek people and Turkish people to get to know each other better. So, I felt that I was part of this generation that produced and took advantage of that interest. But then, we felt like many of us felt that, wow, we're doing this for the first time. But it wasn't. And then I started looking at this history from like the beginning of the Turkish Republic until like the 2000s. And I realized that there were waves of people getting interested in making an effort to produce a better relationship and to produce a tighter relation between the two societies. But the thing is that big politics, top-down politics, would probably usually dominate over them. So the thing is that specifically after the 70s, there was a significant effort by both people in the Greek left and the Turkish left that specifically with an anti-nationalist tone, they were trying to produce contact between them and produce a new kind of discourse that we could imagine what we tell about national identities in a different way, not as identities that are prone to conflict, but are as identities that, because of our proximity, we can maybe fight together for a better future. And so that's how it started back in the 70s. And it's interesting now to connect your first question with this one. It was again musicians that were at the forefront of this. Some of them, are very significant and very known figures like Zülfü Livaneli or Mikis Theodorakis that were already from the 70s. They met in Germany in half exile, on exile, and they started saying, we need to do something because we get so well along together, we Greeks and Turks. It specifically people that were meeting because of circumstances of exile in Germany, in the UK, or in France. They started realizing that we have so many things in common in terms of culture. We're so much more alike between us than we do with the other Europeans. So what is this that is kind of blocking us from, having a better relationship and get over all this kind of leadership or struggles that the leaders kind of bring into play? So this is something that started growing and growing and growing, despite the fact that it was very difficult for people to talk about better Greek-Turkish relations or Greek-Turkish friendship, on that matter, in that period, because nationalism was very dominant. So I was following this growth, which was it was a very interesting research to do, because you would see how people, despite even facing violence against them, despite the fact that they were called traitors in its own country for wanting to talk with the other, they didn't stop fighting and trying to produce a new discourse about the possibility of Greek and Turks to be friends, right? And it was very interesting that at the end, with the earthquakes in 1999, something that came from the fringes of the society, something that was kind of a radical discourse within the society, because everybody was like, no, guys, you Greeks and Turks can never find it, can never get there. There was a major event that let this discourse of friendship become something open to the public. And since then, many things changed. Many things changed a lot. So it was interesting to reveal what I call a genealogy of this discourse on Greek-Turkish friendship from a period that it was actually hidden. It was actually staying in the shades. So that was the main research that went into the book in 2014, because since then until now, many things have changed. Maybe we can talk about it.
Well, I wanted, first of all, just to pick apart this aspect you're talking about friendship, for example. So emotion plays quite a big role in all of your research. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. So, for example, you have this book chapter which is about from excitement to boredom, which is interesting to talk about, because I would never classify Turkish-Greek relations as boring.
Yes.
So could you talk a bit about that, really?
Yes. This actually also came out from because in my research, a part of it is historical, a part of it is discourse and political analysis, and a part of it is ethnographic research, so anthropological, using tools of social anthropology mostly. So while I was, how did I do this? I participated in one of the many initiatives for Greek-Turkish friendship that was going on during the period I was doing my PhD, 2008, 2009, 2010. And I was trying to see how people feel in being engaged in these initiatives. How do they do it? How it is for people who had never visited Turkey to participate in one of these initiatives and for the first time visit someone from the other side, all this kind of conflict resolution seminars that were run during that period, etc., etc. And I realized something which was very interesting. The younger people that had never come to Turkey, or vice versa, right? The Turkish people that had never been to Greece, and they suddenly would meet together, and they would feel that their stereotypes were completely smashed at that moment, because they would see someone that it's like them, it's much more closer to their cultural habitus and standards than many people from the region or, Europe, etc., etc. They would get so much excited about this. They would, for many people, it suddenly became a target of their life to make those relationships better. And then you would see those people that they had already done this 10 years ago. And it was like, oh, yes, we need still to keep doing the same things, because although our generation actually succeeded in bringing about a network of people that would be very fine with them. It was like we knew that Greeks and Turks are so much alike. We knew that, and we knew so how easy it could be to solve these issues. Then you have a new generation that was feeling that they were doing it for the first time. So there was a conflict between this excitement of new people coming in, coming with all the stereotypes that we haven't managed to break down, right? Despite the fact that there were networks of civil society working well. And this old generation that was feeling that, oh my God, we have to do this again and again and again. And there is no breakthrough in changing those history textbooks that produce the stereotypes, change the attitudes of those political elites that like to return to this tension discourse whenever they have an internal problem in Greece or in Turkey, and they want to use this feeling of marching behind the flag, right? So this was a very interesting conflict, and I was trying to see if this creates a problem in the movement. And it does create a problem in the movement, because sometimes it's very difficult, and there is a feeling of cancellation for the old generation that has done so much, to feel that you're moving on and then you are back into stage one again. one of the most interesting things that I've noticed is that the naming and the naming of initiatives, that if you look at the history from 1970s until today, you might find several initiatives that are called the first meeting of Greek Turkish journalists in 67, the first meeting of Greek Turkish journalists in 78, the first meeting of Greek Turkish journalists in 2000. And it's like, how is it possible? It's possible because of a combination of forgetting, of lack of knowledge of the movement itself, which is, I think, my work kind of try to contribute on, so that we don't start from the tabula rasa every time that we start working on this. So it was a kind of an analytical tool, this conflict between boredom and excitement, that was like trying to help us to move on. How can we do something that will produce a more stable stamp in the history of the movement and in the progression of the movement for peace and friendship?
Wonderful.
If that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Yes, it's interesting, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Nowadays, many people talk about multidisciplinary in research, but that's a concept that I think that rarely works. And you managed to put together a conference, and then that led to a publication, which was truly multidisciplinary during your postdoctoral fellowship at the BIAA. And the publication is called Bordered Places, Bounded Times, Cross-Disciplinary Perspectives on Turkey. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and how you managed to bring together people from different backgrounds?
Yeah, of course. So I think that this relates with my landing into the BIAA, which was, everybody knew it as an institute of archaeological research. And at that time, we were two postdoctoral fellows, me and Emma Baysal. She's an archaeologist, and we were sharing the same room. At the point, we felt like, it's nice to hear about your research a bit, and like, okay. And suddenly then, Lutz, our director, back then and still today, she came with, why don't you try? She noticed that we started talking about concepts that could kind of be concepts that were uniting or cut crossing across the two disciplines, like political science and archaeology. So why don't you try to do something about it? And we're like, would that be possible? To tell you the truth, I still remember one of my professors at my undergraduate studies, that he was saying, interdisciplinarity is something difficult. It's something that you need to knit your way into combining different perspectives. You can just not jump from one discipline to the other and do what you call like this multi-disciplinary approach, which just like cherry picking from different things, which it's a recipe to failure. And I was like, when Luke told us this, I was like, remember what your professor had told you, you cannot really do this. And I was like, but it's okay. We were talking about borders. We were talking about theory of borders. And it was like, okay, and that question came up, like, can we talk about borders in this long durée? Can we talk about borders as a theoretical concept which we can explore because of its long duration and its significance across like the centuries and millennia? So that was the main idea, that I think it made the idea solid. But then from a solid idea to make something solid, it was very So it was a very, I think the conference, doing the conference, it was easy because, we invited people. It was in the middle of the 2013 Gezi Park protest, which was another layer of being quite interesting. Let's leave it aside for now. And then from those discussions, it was obvious that there is something there that we can really explore as approaching the idea of borders from this multidisciplinary approach and trying to find what is common for all of us, like from archaeologists, historians, political science, anthropologists. Producing the book, it was it was very difficult, and because it was very difficult to push people to think through the same theoretical perspectives, which I think we will finally partially successful at least pushing,
Mhm.
like pushing everybody to start working a bit on this idea. And for us, it was, I mean, I think for Emma and for me, it was a very interesting process because we had to distill all this information and see how we can all bring it together in an introduction. So I think it was a brave, not in the very typical of British English way of brave, crazy. We were brave to do it, but I think it was a successful attempt.
Yes.
And actually, that experience, something that I told you also before, helped me a lot when I landed in a department, which is a area studies department, and we have historians, anthropologists, legal scholars, political scientists, economists, and cultural studies scholars together. And I was like, okay, I can do this.
You're prepped.
Yes.
It's interesting because I always feel, so I trained in comparative literature, and I always feel that is a very good kind of basis for the BIA actually, because that again is a discipline where we're sort of trained from, from the beginning to think across disciplines and think about literature existing in multiple different contexts. So yeah, I could totally see what you mean. But that said, I'm going to ask you a question now, which is based on a term which I believe you coined, which is cultural extimacy. What is that?
The $1 million question.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there is a term already existing, which is cultural intimacy, coined by Michael Herzfeld, a very famous anthropologist who has been working on Greece, and he has produced some major works that help us understand this relation between the local and the national, between the cultural aspects of what connects people to their national or local identity in terms of the not only every segment of cultural life, that it can also be connected on what kind of food you eat and how you enjoy food and how you enjoy food vis-a-vis other people or vis-a-vis the way that other people see you. One of his most significant examples is that, there might be something that that the others, the outsiders, find disgusting. For instance, the way we Greeks might be eating souvlaki, like this and everything dripping down, But this is why you love it so much, because it's part of the identity, that it's only yours. So that only yours is a very specific thing in the cultural intimacy concept offered by Herzfeld. In my work in Greek-Turkish relations generally, and specifically at this kind of civil society or societal level, there is something that, it's the most common thing that you see when Greeks and Turks meet for the first time. It's that like, we share the same things, we have the same cultural, we share the same foods. What is yours, what is mine, it's another story. But at the end of the day, we eat baklava, you eat baklava. We don't know who's the baklava. We can talk about who's the baklava.
That'll be in the aftercut where
Yes.
you argue over where that comes from.
But the thing is, suddenly, while I was connecting these two semantic worlds, or a Herzfeld world, which is like the cultural intimacy, and what makes us feel Greeks is the way that we consume things, and then you have a totally different other. Greeks and Turks, we are par excellence the others, the enemies, and they do share all these things, and vis-a-vis the other world, which can be weird, the way both societies might in Bayram or Easter holidays treat animals, which is exactly the same thing. And to the outside eye, this looks like, oh my God. And this is something that for both Greeks and Turks is part of your own cultural identity. And then there are those things that brings us so common because you feel you share something, but with someone who is not only different than you, stereotypically is your enemy. So I was thinking there, it's not an intimacy, this, because it's not by default intimate. It's by default it's a very weird feeling to realize that you share something so much common with your enemy, that you are actually like him or like her. So I brought this idea, which comes from the concept of extimacy, comes from Lacanian psychoanalysis. I'm not going to go into it.
Yes.
Okay. So combining that concept, which in a way means that something can be outside of you, but at the same time inside you, and let's leave it like there. Cultural extimacy talks about this weird feeling of sharing something as if it was yours with someone which is your absolute other. And this creates a tension that can go two ways. And this is where the baklava comes. It can go towards the way that, oh my God, I'm sorry, we share so many things in common, and it actually can work for our benefit, because let's get over all those differences. You know, we have nothing actually to divide. You know, we can see how we can live peacefully together, since we're eating moussaka, we are enjoying the life in the same way. Or it can be translated to the absolute other antagonistic way, which can be, oh my God, you're stealing what is mine. And there where it comes. Who's the baklava? And the response can create actually more tension than if you would be in conflict with someone that you didn't share any kind of cultural aspects of life. And that is where all these initiatives that reinterpret these commonalities come to play a very significant role, because they interpret them as a common thing that we can share together.
So I would like to ask you about your PhD and the topic that you said that you would come back at the beginning of our conversation, the discourse analysis, and especially how does it work in post-truth era?
Well, another big subject. Let's try to make it accessible. So, in discourse theory, in what we can call discourse studies, there are so many different strands. So, if you start going into the details of it, it's like a bit of a chaotic world for an outsider. There are very different approaches. So, just to give an example, there are approaches, for instance, in discourse and textual analysis, that they would look, at text, counting words, and these words would be significant words. So when you see many of those words, it means something for the textual production. There is what is called critical discourse analysis, which looks at the relationship of power structures and texts. So they would look at how power, how education would create forms of knowledge that they would go into your text, into your discourse, and you try to examine this relation. In my case, and this is what is called the ideology and discourse analysis strand of the discourse studies, the most interesting thing of the approach is that we don't see discourse as simply as a text. We don't see discourse as something it's written that you're going to do. What we say is that all of the world around us is discursively defined. Everything is something because you give a meaning to it. There is a very classic thing that if you go on your first course on discourse and discourse analysis in discourse theory, they will tell you a tree falls in the middle of nowhere in a forest. What is it? Is it something that discursively makes sense? Is an event? It's not. Everything starts making sense once we give meaning to it. And from this perspective, everything is discourse. Every kind of social aspect of life, social, political aspect of life is discourse. So from this approach, this is for me and for my research, it has been quite how can I say, a push to be free to examine everything beyond the textual. So the question that I posed was not related only to texts. It was also in the way, how do people feel excitement and boredom? How do people define the relation? How do people define the relationship with the other, the Greek, the Turk, vis-a-vis this was, in a nutshell, what is discourse for me, and how it helped me examine every little element of this relation between Greeks and Turks, the history of Greek-Turkish initiatives for peace and friendship, by having a point of entry. So how do we define the other? How do we interpret our world? What are the meanings that are there more dominant at the point, or that some initiatives can come and produce new meanings to give. For instance, as the example I gave you before is a very good example. Commonality. Greeks and Turks share common things. Well, you can infuse two totally different meanings into this commonality, one antagonistic and one that produces a more friendly relations. This is how discourse theory helped me go to explore this, because everything is infused with meaning, and meaning can be dominant or can be challenged, etc., etc.
Great.
Okay, so talking then more about emotion again, I wanted to ask you about the role of hope in your research. Yeah, please tell us more. Give us hope.
Yes. No, I mean, specifically in my research on Greek-Turkish relations, I mean, hope, it was something that, I mean, the whole research was exploding with hope, and that was a very nice thing for me to get involved in a research object that was seemed to be producing more and more better results in its own development. I mean, the movement for Greek-Turkish peace and reconciliation, right? Then it's something that always, how can I say this? My next research field, which was Turkish politics, because when I came here, I tried to, and I did manage to finish the book, but then it was a period of intense political relations in Turkey from 2013 up to now, of course. So hope for me became something that I started looking for as a political analytical tool. So trying to see at every political moment which are the social spaces that produce hope. And it was a nice way to look at the Turkish society and the Turkish contemporary political history also, because you saw specifically back then from 2008-9, when I started my research, a bit earlier, up to 2015-16, I think there was an issue about hope was a significant political word also in Turkey here. And where we are now, I think we are in a period that there is a hope crisis. I'm just thinking about this now. This is not a ready-made answer, right? Because I think what we had so far, we were at least in what we could say, the liberal world around us, there was a kind of common agreement that our values and the hope for a better world was a kind of common hope. A common hope for a more free world, a more democratic world. I think we were kind of sure that with most of the world, we were sharing the same basis and the same hope. And all the other things that we were experiencing were kind of either deviations from that or problems that we could solve.
Yeah.
And suddenly, for the last few years, we are in a world that we start realizing that there is a world out there, there are people out there, and their number is getting significant, that, for instance, democratic politics is not their hope.
Yes.
And this is, I mean, it's a very weird situation. That freedom that we have been all fighting for since the French Revolution was an international value, was a value for everybody. It's not anymore. You can see polls from around the world, and specifically some countries, that comes out and you see more and more people say that we prefer a strong leader than democratic politics. And this is a moment of a crisis of hope, because when you start having hopes clashing,
Yes.
it's a recipe for a situation which leads to conflict.
Yeah.
And so we are inside this, and this is very puzzling and very troubling.
Can I dig on towards something on that,
Yeah.
which is, so when you were saying this kind of strong leader aspect, or desiring a strong leader, as opposed to kind of hope, let's say, for the kind of freedoms that we're talking about, do you think that is due to economic situation quite often? The fact that, there are some countries where it is they're very poor, for example, And so those kinds of freedoms that we all kind of enjoy are seen as perhaps, I don't know, kind of privileges, really, in that kind of idea. I don't know. Do you
No,
see what I mean?
of course, of course.
Yeah.
And if we look at it historically, I
Mm.
think the moments of huge economical crisis were like those moments that you had those leaders that came out with these big solutions,
Mm.
and people would actually, you know, go in line with them
Mm.
because they thought that that big man usually has
Yes.
the answer, right?
Mm.
But we need to remember that in many of those cases, the world was led to huge disasters like
Yeah, of
the
course.
Second World War.
Yeah.
So you are absolutely right. The economy is behind this at a significant level, but I think it's not only this anymore.
Mm.
Because there is always a big fight between economists and political scientists.
Mm.
What is driving the world forward. And there is this classic, it's the economy stupid. We say, no, well, it's not the economy only, because economy can actually be so much affected from political visions. And this is, you can just change the world and then think about how the economy will be. The problem is that you start seeing this in areas that economic disparity or the economic problems are not that high, are not a major issue. You have this in areas that the cultural identity issue is becoming the major driver of this.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a quite puzzling period because we have a retreat on democratic politics, we have a retreat on progressive politics. It's definitely about a number of people that are trying to preserve something, but they're usually trying to preserve something that they are. Some political elites are directing them to hope for a new future that will be better for them. But this future is really so much abstract. And I think talking a bit about Brexit is a very interesting thing here. For instance, how all these discussions about a much brighter future after Brexit was promised. And people really believed that. And now they felt that their hopes were completely shattered after this. But we see this now in the United States so much. All this abstract hope for a much greater America, that it's going to be what? So, unfortunately, there is something that is feeding making all these kind of leaders and this kind of discourse justifiable but I don't know where this will lead. I don't think we live times that are very. We can talk about hope in the very hopeful.
Yes.
Because hope itself is changing. It's becoming a tool for politics that are really undemocratic, and they lead to conflict. That's the major issue.
From one macro hope, maybe we can ask you our last question, which is a micro hope. Like, what are your hopes for the future of the BIAA in terms of the research area that you were leading?
First of all, I want to say that it's really great to see the development and the growth and the growth into so many different areas of research. And one of those is the current podcast that you're doing. So it's really, for me, I feel that there is something stable there. It's now a bit the thing of the past, because now I moved on to Greece for a few years now. But it feels like that there is such a hub of energy here in Ankara, and of course in London too, that all the work that you're doing is so important. I think the most important thing is that BIA keeps supporting new research and new researchers. And this is such a because I think myself that I've gained so much from this postdoctoral fellowship. I wouldn't be the person that I am now if I hadn't this opportunity to come here and for a year and a half, 2 years, work on my research like uninterrupted and be in total freedom of what I was doing. and with a really generous support. So I think this is one of the most significant things that the Institute is doing, and I feel it keeps doing and will do. But I'm so happy to see that the development in all the areas, in the digital repository area, in the cultural heritage management area, which is something that it is so important for the region also. And I think this would be also a kind of possible future point of collaboration, specifically with between Greece and Turkey, and we could at the point talk about this.
I'm very happy to finish on this note. Really
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you so much, Leo. This
Thank you.
was amazing.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you very much. And görüşürüz.
Görüşürüz.